Hey everyone. Today we are talking about how to be wide awake, how to lean in to purpose and presence and vitality in this chapter and not just endure this chapter. I know a lot of you are in the midst of change and you're not sure maybe how your life is going to go from here. Maybe your role has changed or circumstances have changed, or you're just fighting that idea of I'm getting older. Am I still relevant? Am I still as relevant as I was when I was 30? And so we're going to talk about all of that today, about this idea of how do we come alive in midlife. And I can't even handle how excited I am to introduce my coaching team to you today. And for those of you who have been with us on this podcast for a while, you know that I transitioned to coaching years ago, but really transitioned to being on a team a couple of years ago. And it has been one of the most powerful experiences of my life. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that who we are around really matters. And these two have changed my life. I can truly say that. And they have enlivened my purpose in this season. And so it is so appropriate that I have them on today. Let me introduce them to you. Emily Jamieson is the first one, otherwise known as MJ. MJ, welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
So that's MJ's voice. You're going to be hearing from her. And she is incredible. She is a woman of deep insight and wisdom. She is a mom of 4 boys. They live in Gig Harbor, Washington. She is an incredible leadership coach. And she is someone who I learn from every single day. Emily Love is the other one. Welcome, Em.
Thanks for having me. So happy to be here.
So that's Emily Love's voice, and also just another incredible, inspiring person who brings joy and energy wherever she goes. She is a mom of 4 children. Oldest is a girl, a teenage girl, and then she's got 3 boys. They live in Atlanta, Georgia. I will say these two have so much to offer that we're barely going to scratch the surface. But just so you know what we do, MJ, will you just tell people what we do as a coaching team?
Yeah, we have the great privilege of working with leaders across industries, and we do character development. And so, character-based leadership development. And so we run workshops, we coach individually, we do keynote speaking, but essentially our heart is to help facilitate incremental transformation for people, because we know that it's those choices that we make day in, day out, when we put action to our knowledge, that actually transforms us and leads us into being the people that we were created to be.
And Emily, why does this matter?
It matters so much because who you are is how you lead. And if leadership is influence and we develop our influence from the core of who we are, then to be a trustworthy leader is to do the internal work. And you just cannot divorce character from trustworthy and leadership that other people want to follow. So it's not just like the one thing that you add to your leadership. It is the thing of leadership. And it's the thing that keeps you safe inside of your influence. So we're passionate about it. And it's the honor of our lives to not only give opportunities for other people to experience it, but for us to grow inside of it ourselves. And that is our integrity as coaches, is if we say this work matters, and it has to matter to us, and we're practicing it daily.
Emily, what do you say to people who say, well, I'm not a leader?
I love that statement because it's just not true. And, actually, surprisingly, I hear it a lot. The truth is, if you lead yourself, which all of us do, you are a leader. And if you have one other person in your life that lives in a scope of, where they could touch you, listen to you, hear from you, then you are a leader, because leadership is influence. So I'd like to actually take that lie off of the podium that it sits on. And if you're listening today, not only do you lead yourself, but I know you lead at least one other person in the world. So you are a leader.
I love it. These two women, listeners, just so you know, they are master coaches. And I am giving you a seat at their table today. And it's such a great opportunity. So let's dive in. We're going to talk today about purpose, emotional regulation, and aliveness. And these are the three things that are going to help us to come awake in midlife. So let's start with purpose. The term wide awake. MJ, what does that mean to you?
Wide awake. I think the word that comes to mind is attentive. The sense of attentive to what is inside of me, my own motives, my gifts, my shadow spots, like being entirely aware, having, I think, humility. That word is so beautiful and so often misunderstood in the sense that humility is really a sober and right assessment of self. And so to be wide awake is to be aware of all of me, my insides, my outsides, how I'm affecting others, and also wide awake to the people around me, attentive in wonderment. I think curiosity is the best posture that leads us to being wide awake in our lives. And this is not just wide awake to the glorious things of life, but the heights and the depths. I can attest to the fact that just in the last few weeks, I have experienced incredible celebration and deep grief. And some of those both in the same day within the same hours. And I think wide awake is being able to experience fully all of those things, being alive to life and all of its nuance. Yeah.
I was just listening to something about our attention. It was actually by Kurt Thompson, and he was talking about our attention, and that's the greatest gift that we give. But also, there's so often where we are not attentive to what is in front of us. Our brain is going in a million different directions. And so we can be with someone or doing something. We all know this. And then we're just not there. And so what I really heard you say there is being attentive to life, like you're fully in, you're fully coming alive in that moment, whatever it is. And I love that you brought the joy and the pain into that.
Yeah. Presence is what comes to mind as you say that, even presence, that we're not running off into the future or lingering in the past. Some people would say, anxiety lives in the future, depression lives in the past. And what does it look like to be present right in the moment that you're in, to be able to metabolize all the things that are in front of you?
What would you add to that?
That is so well said. I'm going to turn 41 here soon. And that's technically half of my life is over. And I think what's really interesting about this midlife point is that in these development years before we hit midlife, we can just become so busy with the day to day that we kind of lull ourselves to just kind of the tasks that are in front of us. And wide awake to me also means just being radically honest with yourself, that the noise sort of quiets and I can have this radical reflection of honesty. How am I changing? What am I no longer willing to tolerate? Where do I need to, display a little bit more discipline in areas that I've kind of let myself off the hook for? And honesty isn't always easy. And I think in midlife, if we can become wide awake to what is true that's right in front of us, we get to make some really empowering decisions. And I will just add with that, I love what MJ said about both the depths and the highs of our emotions. And I would say that in midlife, I think what I hear is that a lot is talked about what's hard in midlife. And we've got hormones and our kids are leaving and there's grief and there's sadness and we're dealing with aging parents. And we know that life and faith, it's not just all sunshine and rainbows. And I do think wide awake is being willing to chase after joy, to not be afraid of hoping for something that you can go for and allowing ourselves the courage to say, I'm actually going to turn the dial up. I don't love the word positive, but these enlightening, abundant feelings. And I think that can do something for us inside of our lives and our communities when we talk about living wide awake to that a little bit more.
It's interesting. I was on a Peloton ride this morning and she was talking about joy, Allie Love, my girl. And she said, look around you and just find 10 things right in your sphere you can be joyful about. Just stop right here and just identify 10 things. And it was amazing. They were little, they were tiny, but it was my family represented on the wall. It was Allie Love on the Peloton that I actually can be biking. It was the weights that were sitting next to me that I actually am strong enough to lift them. It was a fireplace that just brings me joy because I love fire. Just all those things.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about joy is a choice, and we actually have to look for it and find it every day.
Mm.
Okay. Most women, they have a moment in their life where they can point to it as a shift. And that could be a move, it could be a job change, it could be a crisis in their marriage, a crisis with their kids, or it could just be a change of some kind that's maybe not as dramatic, or a shift in a friendship. As we are looking at maybe those trigger moments, how do women lean into those rather than just be reactionary or responding in a way that makes them feel like they're just constantly playing defense in life rather than offense?
I can't help but think that this is where truly befriending yourself comes into play. And, as you describe those trigger moments, I'm thinking about what happened under the surface for all of us. It's going to be different things that trigger us, and we're going to have different experiences inside of those triggers. And if we can get comfortable befriending ourselves and just not ignoring the like quiet gnaw, or maybe it's this like eruptive feeling, or this like something is so unsettling and I can't figure it out. If we can, kind of still ourselves enough and meet ourselves like we would our best friend, there is so much to learn in those moments. And so we talk about journaling practices a lot. We talk about picking up the phone and like scheduling a call with someone that you deeply love and respect. And I can't help but think that if we were, instead of avoiding what feels hard or like numbing ourselves, kind of just past this feeling that we can't quite, get under, if we were willing to meet ourselves with honesty and compassion, there is so much for us to learn in those moments. And I think they become pathways to our next right decision. But in my mind, it really comes down to our emotions are such a gift. The questions you're asking, all of those different things that you're feeling. And if you would just quiet enough and just answer those questions that are coming up inside of you, oh my word, there's a lot for you there.
MJ, what would you add?
Yeah, I would just dovetail on exactly what you said, where a mentor of mine years ago invited me to this reality. And I'll use the word invitation again. She said, what if those disruptive, sort of uncomfortable emotions are not something to avoid or run from or create any sort of victim mentality, but what if they're an invitation? And pain is a microphone. So when you get a paper cut or something, it brings attention to it, back to that word attention. And I think to be wide awake in these seasons is to pay attention to where there is discomfort or a sense of things aren't quite aligned or quite right. And what if that is the invitation to explore and wonder, what are my deeper desires? Not just my strongest desires to be comfortable or peaceful or whatever it is, but my deepest desires. What do I really want? What do I want to get after? What's shifting in this season? And so I think to bring attention to those things, and again, to befriend, as Emily said, to befriend those emotions, to befriend yourself, but to recognize them as invitations, that they may well indeed be those pathways to the next season. And I think about each time that myself or my husband or us together have felt this sense of, gosh, something is just being disrupted. We're not really sure why or what. That sense of upheaval internally or externally has actually led to some of the most incredible faith building adventures of our lives, while incredibly uncomfortable and somewhat terrifying. To your point as well, having some trusted companions, some wisdom partners to help you process, and also just time alone to journal and reflect and get really honest with yourself and say, what do I really want? What expectations are being missed? What is this revealing to me? How might this lead me into more abundant life as I pay attention to these things coming up inside?
Talk a lot about Ken Weitzman's concept in Create versus Copy, where he talks about whenever there's a diminishing return, it's like something is coming to a close. If you think of it almost like a narrowing margin until it reaches a dead end, and it's almost like a brick wall T. And you've got to go left or right. You can't keep going in the same direction. But he talks about that as the birthplace of innovation. And I love that so much, because I think in midlife, we can feel like there are so many diminishing returns where things are narrowing and we're having to let go of some things. But can we see it as an invitation, like you said? Can we see it as a birthplace of opportunity and innovation? And that feels exciting to me.
Yeah.
And that feels hopeful. And
Mhm.
so, so how do we come alive? Well, we've got to actually let go of the things that are coming to a close so that we can embrace this invitation and this innovation differently.
I can't help but think, Krista, as you're talking about this, how change, like what change has to do with that. And you painted such a vibrant picture. I'm picturing actually myself squeezed and like flattened by that narrowing wall. But I think about this idea too of in midlife, so much is changing. And I've been struck by this idea that the quickest way to lose something is to resist the change that it's requiring. And so what a beautiful invitation inside of all of this to go, inside of even just these triggering moments that might lead us to change. What does it mean for me to stop resisting the change and go with it? That can be really scary, but also really freeing when we identify what is my relationship with change and maybe what does it look like to hold it a little bit differently, as I move into a different season.
Which I think leads us into purpose. What is purpose? How do we know and where do we find it? And is it one thing? I will say, that's why it's so appropriate that you two are on here, because I love this idea that you don't have to find purpose alone, that we actually have found so much purpose together on a team. And that has been incredible in this next season. I think I can speak for all three of us that it has brought us alive in a new way. And so can you just talk a little bit about purpose and actually what it is? How do we find it?
This feels like something that a dissertation should be written on.
Absolutely.
The big grand ideas of the world. Krista, okay, the first thing I'm thinking about is purpose is macro and micro. What do I mean by that? As a person of faith, I find deep purpose in my place in God's story, which is like a macro idea in my mind. Like there's this great story, and my purpose as Emily Love is to glorify God and to serve my neighbor and to be like a light, that like the city on the hill, and to not bury that light. So I see purpose as both broad and incredibly narrow. And I think we can get really confused when we try to make purpose narrow all the time. So as a believer, I'm like, okay, so my purpose in the world is my faith. And this is how I'm doing that, like in my neighborhood. But I also have purpose in my family as a wife and a mom. And I've identified those roles, and as a friend, and I have incredible purpose with the triad and what we're doing. But I would also say micro purpose is what I think when we can drill down to the micro levels of how did God make me uniquely? Because I am still on the triad team, but my gifts are very different than either one of yours. Most are complementary. We have some overlapping gifts, but also mine stand alone. And so one of my favorite things that I heard in terms of kind of finding your purpose and your micro purpose, like what's God's unique thumbprint on you? Louis Giglio ran his congregation through a list of questions at the beginning of January back in 2019, and it changed my life. The set of questions was, what do other people tell you that you're good at? Like, what problem do you want to solve that keeps you up at night? What have you dreamt of doing your whole life but have never done yet? What are you passionate about? Like, what do you just love? And as I drilled down those questions, I came to my unique purpose. And what's so cool about macro micro is now I can take my micro purpose and fit it into any environment that I'm in. So if I am meant to, I'm an encourager, and I'm meant to spread light and passion to the world and help them believe in themselves. Well, I can do that anywhere now. So whether that's in my faith story or in my family or with the neighborhood moms or with my corporate leaders across the world on my global team, I can bring both macro and micro to the table, and then it doesn't feel so overwhelming. So I don't know. What do you guys poke holes in that? What do you hear there?
Oh, I think that is so beautiful. And I would just say yes and amen. And I guess maybe give it a bit of color in the way that I've understood. But that sense of purpose, I think a lot of people think about calling. And how often, like you're saying, it gets very narrow. What is my calling? And they're thinking about a career path or a role that they carry, whether it's to be a business owner or a mom or a wife or a volunteer guru, whatever it might be. And I think what has been so helpful to me is to recognize my purpose is to live into, like you said, the unique identity that God has created in me, and to live in attentiveness and intimacy with God, to be attentive to his voice, knowing that actually that is my calling. My calling is to be in relationship with God. I've been called to be a daughter, a friend, a co-laborer, and yet there are all these assignments that God will essentially lay before me. Some of those assignments will last. Being a mom will last the rest of my life, though how I am a mom to my kids as they're aging, my little frat house, that's going to change and shift. That assignment will actually pivot and change. I, for a season, was an academic coach. That was not my calling. That was an assignment that lasted 10 years. I have other assignments that last a weekend or an hour. And those assignments are where I'm meant to bring about, or really more live into, who I'm created to be. I'm a trajectory shifter, a truth teller, a guide. Like, this is what God calls me. And so whether I glance off of someone in one conversation in a moment or for a long period of time in relationship, I trust that we will sort of glance off each other and move closer to the heart of love, the heart of God. And I trust that that's not something I have to try to do. It's just who I am when I am at rest and at peace. And so I think about purpose, and it can shift and change in different seasons of life as well, in terms of whether or not you are running. I think about, I was speaking with a mom who's an empty nester, new empty nester, and she is wrestling, right? Because suddenly she has all this space and she's like, what is my purpose? And I'm trying to distract myself. There's a lot of discomfort. And you've heard it said that comparison is the thief of joy. And I would say that also comparison is the thief of obedience. Because I can look right and left and say, well, wait, God, she's running. She's starting a business at 45. I'm halfway to 90. Let's do this, And there's someone else where the Lord's like, yeah, but I've asked you to rest. There's a sabbatical season for you. I'm doing a preparation work in you. And I've had both those seasons where I'm running and felt like it was unfair that someone else got to rest. And I've been resting and felt unfair that someone else got to run. And to recognize that as I fix my eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of my faith and my life, that my obedience is to hear and respond, allows me to stay in my lane and be full of purpose in the season that I'm in, whether it looks outward and fast and full or inward and quiet and reflective. And so I just think that's been really important for me to recognize in the midst of purpose, assignment, calling, all of those things.
It's so incredible. And I get to see you two live out your purpose in that micro and macro way. And it's so incredible. Right now your season is the Transformation Triad. That is our coaching team name. That is the purpose or the assignment. I like how you said that, MJ. That's the assignment at the moment. But if that assignment were to change for some reason, I know for a fact you too would be carrying on your purpose in that broader way. And I think that's so encouraging that what we carry, what God has stamped in us, is unique and it's never over. So for those of you that have thought my purpose is over, I just want to speak loud and clear. No, it's not. Not until the day you die and the day I die. We have an assignment on this earth and we are not to retire. We are not. And I hope you get what I'm saying in that. I'm not meaning literally. I'm meaning we never retire from the work God has us do. Okay. What does God say about purpose?
Well, like everything, he has so much to say about the things that are most important in our lives. He has to say that we were created for his glory. And so that's a part of our purpose, is reflecting that glory. He said that he has great plans for our future and our life. So he cares about how we carry our purpose. God says that we were created to do good works. That is so incredible. All of us were created to carry a torch of good works. And I think what I love so much about that is when you think about this discussion of purpose, it gets very I central. What am I going to do? And what are my gifts? And what am I talented at? And, how am I going to make money with it? And who's going to hire me? And it becomes very I central. But really, if we look at what God said about purpose, it's that we were created to do good works, and that's with someone else in mind. And so I think that's really an incredible part of this conversation, is thinking about the way God has made me, how does that unique stamp benefit other people? And now we're getting closer to purpose in God's definition when we factor that into the equation. I love this one so much. God said in 1 Corinthians 10:31, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Everything in the world can be done for God's glory or for purpose. My grocery store attempt, the way that I manage my children and their education, and how I take care of my body, and what I do as a professional coach, all of it, from the way that I treat myself to the way that I treat others, right? So what I love so much about that is, again, macro, micro, like it can, if you feel overwhelmed right now by I don't know what my purpose is, start small and start moment by moment and glorify God, be a reflection of his light. You can do that everywhere. And that feels really encouraging to me. And then finally, God works all things together for his purpose in your life. And I just love that so much. Again, back to like, I'm going to take my eyes off myself for a second. And Krista, I know maybe not everybody shares this worldview lens with us, but it gives me great freedom to recognize that his purpose, like he's actually designing and orchestrating all of it first. And that just gives me so much peace to know that he holds a world, that he holds my place in it. And I can really trust his sovereign leadership, take a deep breath, not take myself so seriously, and then get to see life as more of an adventure that's fun to be played instead of this like super serious, like it is serious, but you know, I think that lens can tend to suck the joy out of both how we find our purpose and how we live it out. And so, you know, that gives me great freedom and joy to say, Emily, calm down. It's all good because God goes before you and he's actually orchestrating way more than you could ever touch. Those things really stick out to me. What about you, Krista? What do you think God says about purpose?
Pick any Old Testament character, anyone. Joseph is my favorite. So let's just camp in Joseph for a minute. If you asked Joseph when he had on his beautiful coat of many colors, what is your purpose, Joseph? Then he would have said something. And he would have said, well, you know, I'm the favored son. Here's what I do. Here's where I'm headed in life. And then his life took a drastic left turn. And yet, look at the purpose in that story. I have read that story so many times, and I went through it again this year in the fall. And at that moment, when he's standing before his brothers and they've come to get food, I weep every time because I just think this story could never have, like, it's so mind-blowing. Joseph never could have written this story. His family never could have written this story. And yet God writes the story in a way that is altogether astounding. And it had a lot of pain in it, but it has a lot of redemption and hope in it. And can we just stand in that, yeah, there's a lot of pain in our story. And on our pathway to purpose, there is also a lot of redemption and hope in it because God is writing the story.
Wow. I mean, come on. It makes me want to open the Bible and read it again. Come on with that parallel. And Krista, you're so right. We can tend to make our purpose conversations be all about the glory of what it looks like to follow a purpose. But what if we actually pause and say, no. God says that a part of our purpose is how we get through the most demoralizing seasons of our life and hold fast to our faith. And that is something I can get behind because it's not personal glory there. And sometimes in some of us, and it's going to, if it hasn't happened to you yet, it will happen to you in midlife. You are going to feel the crushing weight of what it means to be human. And oh my goodness, does that not inspire me to think, Emily, a part of your purpose is how you manage your life when the storm hits. Krista, you nailed that one.
And now we're back to choosing joy. You know, Joseph should have been raising his hands in rage to God at every point, and yet he didn't. And there's our choice. There's our part right there. That is our choice, what we do in the circumstances we're in. And
forgiveness and the way he meets his brothers. We need to study that. We need to study that story more. That's good.
I know. Well, so MJ, she had to go to a coaching session, which is our life most of the time. And so Emily and I are actually going to be the ones diving into emotional regulation. as a part of this idea of how do we come alive, we have to address emotions as we talk about this idea of coming alive in midlife because they are central to who we are. And I consider Emily one of the world's leading experts on emotions.
I do not know if I want that title, but wow, thank you for that honoring title.
Well, but let's just talk about like why is emotional regulation important?
Yeah, I'm actually really fascinated around the idea of energy and how emotions change kind of our energetic frequency as humans. The truth is that happens inside of all of us. And so, I'm laughing because Krista, that's a part of why, I'm so passionate about all of this. But I mean, why is emotional regulation important? Because we are emotional beings. And before, did you know this? One of my favorite sort of facts on emotions, before an emotion becomes an emotion, it's actually just a sensation in your body. So it is a feeling. And the way it changes to an emotion is when we label it. Think about that. So this is actually starts to be really key to the actions we take, which is the life ultimately that we have. If I am sensing fluttering in my stomach because, I'm excited about something, but I've actually come to label that sensation as nervousness. Might I not take the next step because I feel like I'm, the nervous system is telling me that I'm not capable? Let's rewind that and say, okay, so I still have the same fluttering in my stomach, but I actually label it as excitement. So then my next action is I move towards something with enthusiasm and passion while regulating that sensation. Now, can't we see that emotional regulation is actually everything? It is learning how to interpret our feelings in a way that lines up with the life we want to live. It's about what do I do when I'm met with an emotion that's really hard for me to carry? For example, I have for years felt really uncomfortable with anger. And so learning how to manage the sensation of anger has changed the game for me. And one way it's done that is I have allowed myself to find the words to communicate why I'm angry, what I'm angry about, but in a way that aligns with my integrity. So I'm not yelling at someone, right? That's the work that I'm doing. I'm journaling, I'm talking to my husband, I'm talking to my coaching team. And then in that, I gain insight. And then with the insight and awareness, I have actually asked myself, okay, what's the next decision that lines up with both honoring the feeling of anger and honoring the way that I want to live? And so, Krista, in short, we don't have enough time to talk about why this is important, but next to, what we talked about, our sole purpose on the planet is to glorify God. How do we do that if we're not aware of and managing our emotions? It's next to impossible. So I would say outside of honoring Christ, like this is key that we start to bring some curiosity and some love into this conversation around emotions, because if we learn to meet our emotions with curiosity and then act not in reaction to our emotions, but in alignment with our highest values, we become powerful people because we're never far from integrity. And that's who I say I am, and what I do is lined up.
That is really powerful. And I think about a lot of people would say, isn't that suppression? If I'm not allowing them to fully come out in their full form, isn't that suppression? But what I hear you saying is no, it's alignment. When you choose the way that you're going to process your emotions and show up in response to them, you are aligning your values with your behavior. And that is a difference maker. Would you add anything to that?
Oh, I love that so much. And I think I would just, it's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking about the word discipline. So it's not suppression. I mean, suppression is actually really unhealthy. I don't know if you've ever heard this statement. I did not come up with it, but dis-ease causes disease in our body. So that suppression, when we actually keep it closed into our fleshly capsule, we can actually create unhealth in our body. It's alignment and discipline to let ourselves feel, explore in a way that's honoring, and then, align those actions. Now we're talking about leading ourselves from an entirely different place. That self-discipline and self-leadership really comes into play here. And I just think it's that like radical acceptance, Krista, of who we are and what we're feeling and how we're acting. I don't excuse myself and my behavior. I become radical in my ownership of what's going on inside of me. And that's really key. And I think we can easily and flippantly be like, well, they did this. And I'm so, I'm so frustrated about that. Well, they pushed me to this level and they would stop doing what I said to stop doing. Then I wouldn't have reacted that way. And I say, no, let's put a time out. And maybe this is the love that you didn't really want, but I'm going to say, you're responsible for you. Take ownership of that responsibility and watch your life transform from that place. It's a little bit harder of a love, right? But I think it's something that we actually need to talk about, and we need to hold our best friends accountable to, because we want the best for them. And I think that's how you start to create that.
Yeah. How have you done that, Emily? Because that's hard. You're actually asking us to do it. Like how? How do you do it?
I think it goes back to loving yourself like a friend and leaving time for self-leadership. Last week, this is true, I called you and asked for a coaching session because I was dealing with something hard and recognized that I couldn't come to what I wanted in myself. And so I asked for an hour of your time and you gave it to me. And from that, I gained so much clarity. I slowed down. I talked about what I was feeling. I set what do I want most, and we worked on where to get that. And Krista, I can't help but think that it is in the slowdown, the pause, and the connection. Mm-hmm. That's the tangible how-to. What would you add? I mean, as a coach, you see this every single day. Mm-hmm. What would you add to that in terms of how we make this possible in our lives?
I was working through something with someone this week where they came to me and they just said, this is really hard. This is triggering for me. She came to me and said, can you talk tomorrow? I said, yes, I'll make time. She didn't respond to that person because felt like she needed to pause. And within that 24 hours, because she was able to journal, to do some reflection, and then choose the way she wanted to go forward, she went forward in a way that was so aligned with her values and her highest self. And by the time we talked, she really didn't even need me. She really didn't need to talk it out anymore. She had worked it out in her own self. She allowed the space to do that, and she used the tools that she needed to do that. And I just think about, wow, I mean, this is a primary relationship for her. And I just kept saying, good job, because this is a primary relationship for you, and what you do and how you act and what you say and what actions you put forward determine the path of this relationship for the rest of your life. I was talking to someone who was speaking about their mother, and they said her inability to manage her emotions has truly tanked every relationship in her life.
That's sobering to hear, isn't it?
Yes. That is a big statement. And you think about how true it is. If we run around and run amok with our emotions,
right,
we also will tank every relationship in our life.
Krista, you asked me why is this important? And actually, I think maybe you just answered it even better than I did. And it is that we do not live in a vacuum, in isolation. We are not iRobot, the last robot on the planet. We all, again, back to leadership. What is it? It's influence, and it's if one other person, we are surrounded by people. And yes, Krista, this is why emotional regulation matters, because we do not live in isolation to me, myself, and I. And our relationships, isn't that the Great Commission? Talk about purpose. How do we live a witness and a testimony if we blow up relationships because we cannot manage ourselves? It's everything.
It's everything. Okay, this is a great place to end. This is part 1 with the transformation triad. And we are going to continue with part 2 next week. So be sure to tune in and hear how else we can come alive in midlife.